Senator Johnson, thank you very much.
Possession and dissemination should receive 57. I happen to be the chief author of that, and I'll give the gavel over to our Vice Chair, Senator Johnson. So, Senator Johnson, you have the gavel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Senator Limmer. So when you are ready, we will give you the floor for 1475.
I'm ready now, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Limmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senate File 1457, this addresses child pornography crimes, and Sentencing Guidelines Commission increased rankings, at least the direction we're going in. I need to unpack this a little bit, little brief history. Earlier this session, the Minnesota Sentencing Guidelines Commission presented their annual legislative review or report to this committee. In the report, they addressed whether the enhanced offenses of child pornography possession and dissemination should receive higher severity rankings on the sentencing grid, which ultimately means longer sentences. Enhanced crimes are when the victims involve minors under the age of 13, or the offender is a repeat offender or is required to register as a predatory offender. We need to recall in 2019, the legislature passed legislation that asked the commission to consider changing those guidelines for enhanced child pornography offenses. The commission's vote on this issue was divided, resulting in a majority and a minority report. While the commission unanimously agreed that the felony crime of child porn production, which uses minors in sexual performance, should receive a higher severity ranking, the majority indicated a lack of clarity by the legislature when it comes to enhanced possession and dissemination of crimes. We'd like to address that clarity in Senate File 1457. This bill agrees with the minority report recommendation that severity rankings be raised one level for the enhanced offenses of dissemination and possession of child porn. We enhanced those crimes in 2019 due to the egregious nature of the offense toward innocent children. We need to better protect our children from the heinous crimes of these offenders, and this bill makes the legislature's intent crystal clear. Mr. Chairman, I'll stand. I believe we have a witness or a testifier or two that would want to join us in this discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Which testifier would like to join in? Please unmute your mic, and Ms. Mitchell.
Senator Johnson, thank you very much. Is it okay if I share my screen? I do have like 2 slides that will also help with my testimony today.
Yes, please go ahead and do that. So introduce yourself for the record and begin.
Great, thank you very much. So I am Kelly Lynn Mitchell. I am the chair of the Sentencing Guidelines Commission. I am sharing my screen right now. And I'm here just to, I would urge this committee not to pass this bill. And I'm here really to explain the rationale of the commission a bit more as to why we chose not to increase these 2 offenses at the same time as we did make a decision to increase two other offenses. So I'm just going to go through that quickly, show the difference between what the commission has recommended and what Senator Limmer's bill would do, and then I would stand for any questions as well. So as Senator Limmer said, there's three offenses that comprise child pornography. We have production, which involves direct contact with the victim to create child pornography. That's use of minors in a sexual performance under our statutes. We have dissemination, which means sharing images or videos, and we have possession, which means actually having images or videos that depict child pornography. What the Commission has proposed is that we increase the enhanced version of production to severity level C. That's a severity level where everyone is recommended prison. We also have proposed that we increase the regular level of production up one severity level. And in doing this, what we've done is we've created 3 groupings for these offenses, with production being the most severe form of child pornography, dissemination in the middle, and possession down at the bottom. We think that this results in more proportionality in terms of sentencing, and it also achieves the goals that the legislature is trying to achieve with sentencing in this area. As Senator Limmer indicated, in 2019, you did create a new version of these enhanced offenses that means that if these images involve a child who's under 13, that they'll be charged as enhanced offenses rather than as the regular version of the offenses. So when we thought about increasing, we did have a discussion about also increasing. Well, actually, let me go back. I'm sorry. So back when you created that enhancement, the Commission talked about it. We thought about where to rank it. We decided to rank it alongside the other enhanced offenses as we had already done previously. So where they're showing on the grid, except for production, is where we ranked it. And we knew that we were going to be doing this review and that we might come back to you with further recommendations for increasing sentencing. We then talked about, as I said, we increased production, but we didn't increase dissemination or possession. And the reason that we did that, we talked about it, but there's a couple of reasons why we didn't do that. First of all, we looked at the underlying offenses of dissemination and possession, the non-enhanced versions. We went back and reviewed the complaints, because that's what we had a history on, right? To see how many of those could be charged under the new enhancements. And we found that almost all of them could be charged under the new enhancements for children under 13. So 81% of the possession cases that had been charged during that 3-year period we looked at could have been charged as the enhanced version. 88% of the dissemination cases could have been charged as the enhanced version. So by ranking them higher, we're already putting them higher. We're already increasing sentences for those crimes. Second thing that goes on in these types of cases is the way that they're charged. And usually there are multiple charges, not just one charge for these types of offenses. So possession and dissemination typically come into court with multiple charges where people who have different download dates, each download date becomes a charge. Or if there's multiple victims that can be identified in those images, up to 2 victims can be charged separately. So you're coming into cases with multiple charges. And what happens in Minnesota, under Minnesota law, we have a process called Hernandizing, where as you're convicted on the first offense, that then becomes criminal history for the next offense. And then if you've got, 2 offenses going to a third, that then becomes criminal history for the third offense. So within one single sentencing event, a person can actually move across the grid into that prison zone. So move from the shaded portion of the grid into the white portion of the grid. And we've noticed that for child pornography, that happens more often than for other types of offenses. So those two, the combination of things, already ranking these higher, being able to use Hernandizing, we saw that you really could get more severe sentences without ranking them even higher. And then the third factor that caused us not to move dissemination and possession up is the fact that we looked at the recidivism rates for this group, and we saw that recidivism was low. It's actually about half the rate of recidivism for general felony offenses. So when we combine the fact that more harsh sentences are already available with the low recidivism rates, we just didn't feel that there was a justification for further increasing the rankings of dissemination and possession. But like I said, for production, we recognize that there's more harm to the victim in those cases because it's a direct act of creating child pornography. We did feel that those sentences were not harsh enough, and so we did increase the rankings for those offenses. And that's going to result in an additional 3.5 prison beds per year to change production. So then if we look at the proposal that's in Senator Limmer's bill, it's similar in that production would again move up, just like we suggested. But it would also move dissemination up to that row where prison is the presumptive sentence all the time. And it would move possession up to severity level E as well. And we feel like this results in disproportionality, partly because there's a bigger jump from the base offense to the enhanced versions of the offenses. This scheme puts those two severity levels higher than the baseline offense. And then partly because of the fact that production and dissemination, the enhanced versions of those two offenses, are now ranked the same. And as I mentioned before, after hearing testimony, after doing research in over a year into child pornography offenses, we really felt like dissemination and production are not the same thing. Production is the more direct harm to the victim. We really thought that our sentencing needed to differentiate between those two things. So putting them on the same line seemed like it would result in disproportionality from our point of view. Additionally, it's got a pretty hefty prison impact, 58.5 prison beds annually. When you take all of this into account, most of that comes from increasing possession up to severity level E, the enhanced version of possession. And that's because of that combination, like I said, of the fact that multiple charges tend to be charged on these types of offenses, and a person can move across the grid much more quickly with the use of that Hernandezing, or that compounding criminal history process that we have going in our courts. So I hope that helps explain what the commission's perspective was on this issue further. I wanted to make sure you had a full accounting of what we thought about as you're thinking about this bill. I would urge you to go with the commission's recommendation, but I just wanted to make sure you had all that. The last slide here just puts the two right next to each other in case it's easier to read. If you have questions, I'm here to answer those as well. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Ms. Mitchell. I don't see any other testifiers up at the moment. We'll turn this over to the committee then for discussion. Senator Kiffmeyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate hearing the information that is added here, but probably especially when it comes to the low recidivism. I just think after having read more details about the type of crimes that fit in this, the harm to the child is permanent and long-lasting, and the punishment should be also equivalent to the seriousness of the crime. Defenseless children, most vulnerable, most harmed by this, long-lasting. And so recidivism, whatever it is, even if it's 50%, that's still 50% that are out there doing this again to the innocent. And so I very much support this bill, Senator Limmer. Thank you for bringing it forward.
Thank you, Senator Kiffmeyer. Senator Latz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One question I have is with the different bed impact. Is there
I'm sorry, Senator Latz, you broke up there for a second. Senator Latz, are you there?
Did you not hear me?
Yeah, it broke up on my end at the last
I'm
sentence.
sorry. Is there a fiscal note on this bill?
Chairman, I would move, or I would ask Mr. Turner to weigh in here.
Thank you, Senator Limmer. Mr. Turner.
Yes, Mr. Chair, Senator Latz and members. The fiscal note was requested. It's not completed at this time. However, the sentencing guidelines portion of the note is complete, and that's the most important one. As Ms. Mitchell stated, the sentencing guidelines estimates that in 22, this is going to add about 4 beds. 23, that ramps up to 11. 24 would be 20 additional beds, 25, 30. And then it maxes out, as she pointed out, at 55 beds, but that isn't for another 11 years. It maxes out in 2032. And there hasn't been any cost attached to that yet. Corrections is still attaching dollars to those bed figures.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Latz.
so here's my concern. First of all, I think we need to have a fiscal note so we understand if there's a cost impact, certainly within this biennium and the next biennium with tails, so we can evaluate that. And I know the response is going to be you can't put a value on the harm that's caused by these offenders, and I would agree, you can't. But we do need to factor in the budgetary impact of our bills, and that's just part of what we have to do. Secondly, in some views, legitimately so, there is no place on this grid that would be sufficient to punish those who have perpetrated this harm or engaged in this illegal conduct. And, that's, I get that. But the fact is, we have different levels of offenses in the statute. We have different crimes in the statute. And just like we have different distinctions between levels of killing another person, including, the circumstances surrounding it, the motivation that's behind it, the planning that goes into it, those kind of things. We draw distinctions, even though obviously the harm to the victim is, in that case, irreparable. And one would say in these kind of cases, not as significant as a killing, but certainly very, very serious. Between the different kinds of offenses, and we draw distinctions between the levels of offenses, whether it's going to be a 20-year or a 15-year felony, for example. And so I think it's appropriate for the Guidelines Commission to draw distinctions as well. I think the rationale that Ms. Mitchell has laid out for the judgment of the majority of the Guidelines Commission is a logical one for the variety of reasons. And if we want to set aside the bed impact for a moment, because I think that's purely a budgetary question as far as I'm concerned. But if you just on the merits of what consequences are appropriate, given that in most cases it won't make a difference because of the nature of the charges, and given that there are already substantial increases related to these things, and for the other distinctions that Ms. Mitchell explained, I don't see, other than the general desire to punish more seriously people who commit child sex offenses. I don't see, as the statutes are distinctive, I don't see the reason to just lump them all together. I think they ought to be distinct in the consequences on the Guidelines Commission grid or on the sex offender sentencing grid as well. And I think Ms. Kelly has laid out a very solid rationale for drawing those distinctions. So this stuff is enormously complicated. There's a lot of judgment calls involved here. I just think, we ought to be really careful here as we analyze this, not to reach our conclusions because we think the conduct is abhorrent, which I think we would all agree it is, but because there are different kinds of conduct involved and that different kinds of conduct ought to be punished differently. And that's what is reflected in the Guidelines Commission's decision. So I think I would agree with the way the Guidelines Commission has characterized these offenses in relation to the other kinds of sex offenses that they are dealing with. And the more you flatten these grids too, the more you just combine all the different types of offenses into one consequence. And then you're not drawing the distinctions that the legislature has drawn in the way things are charged out in the way we have defined crimes. We've defined differences between possession and production and dissemination. And I think our grid for sentencing purposes should accurately reflect those distinctions rather than combining them or flattening the grid into one big section. Otherwise, we could just say all of these should be X number of years in prison, default, period, done. But we don't do that. So I think I support the guidelines proposal as it is, and I'm not comfortable throwing those other provisions into a different guidelines grid as the bill before us proposes to do. And I don't think it's a matter of let's implement the original legislative intent here. I think the original legislative intent is reflected in the Guidelines Commission's decision. And so I'm quite comfortable with that, understanding this is an uncomfortable kind of a topic for all of us to have to work our way through. And I mean, I get the emotions behind it, and I get the impact on victims and all of that. But we have a job, which is to make rational distinctions where they're appropriate. And I think I like the Guidelines Commission's rational distinctions that they have made. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Latz. Senator Pappas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to say that I agree with Senator Latz. Clearly, these are heinous crimes, and we all feel passionately about them. But I've been around long enough to, before we had a Sentencing Guidelines Commission, and the legislature created the commission so that we would have uniformity and proportionality. And that's what I think the commission has done. And I think we need to respect their work. They spend a lot more time than we do with, a half-hour hearing, deliberating and debating, working with people who are criminal justice experts. And so I strongly support the Sentencing Guidelines Commission and think we shouldn't tinker with their recommendations. So I'm going to be opposing the bill.
Thank you, Senator Pappas. Senator Kiffmeyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question for Ms. Mitchell.
Ms. Mitchell, you still there? There you are.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I'm here.
All right, Senator Kiffmeyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Ms. Mitchell, today you mentioned Hernandizing and explained that because of Hernandizing, these crimes would be moving these different levels. But also previously, if I recall, you mentioned ending Hernandizing or changing that policy. Just a little bit unsure about the position of the Minnesota Sentencing Guidelines Commission. Where are they at on Hernandizing? It's a big deal.
Thank you, Senator Kiffmeyer. Ms. Mitchell.
Senator Chair Johnson and Senator Kiffmeyer. Yes, we did engage in a short discussion about Hernandizing. It is something that actually doesn't just affect these crimes, but that is available to affect all crimes. And on a personal level, it is a discussion I would like to have more about because there are a couple of places within the guidelines where I think Hernandizing can be abused. But the commission's position is that Hernandizing is here to stay. So that is where we did have a bit of a discussion about that topic on the commission. The commission ultimately did not want to do anything with that topic. So no, that Hernandizing is still available, and it was actually part of the underlying rationale, the availability of Hernandizing, part of the underlying rationale for keeping dissemination and possession ranked where they are.
Mr. Chair, I appreciate.
Thank you, Ms. Mitchell. Senator Kiffmeyer.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that explanation, but because of that discussion and all of the power that this commission has, it has me greatly concerned, and especially the way it's been set up, that they can take actions, and unless the legislature overrides them, it becomes a policy. So I would rather stick with Senator Limmer's bill, because at least that way we are covered in both instances. And again, these are crimes that are, Senator Latz, when you talk about proportionality in some of these crimes, I look at it this way. The crime committed, proportionality on the victim. And in this case, proportionality to this victim and the lifelong suffering that they are going through, to me, weighs way more heavily in regards to it. And it's the one thing, not only that, and the recidivism. Remember, recidivism here means another innocent child, another of all those things. So yes, I am definitely looking at, in regards to proportionality, but the victim and then the crime, an adult versus a child. So I think that's, to me, is a really important consideration and in supporting the bill. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Kiffmeyer. Senator Bingham.
Mr. Chair, I don't know if Senator Latz wants to respond to that. I'd yield my time to him because mine's not related to what Senator Kiffmeyer just said.
Okay. Senator Latz, was that to Senator Kiffmeyer's point?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was actually going to ask if Kelly Mitchell could give us the definition of proportionality as it's used in the law, which I think is different than the way Senator Kiffmeyer is approaching.
Ms. Mitchell, you want to elaborate on that?
Right. So proportionality means that as the seriousness of the harm the seriousness of the offense increases, so does the penalty that's imposed. So in order to figure out those differences in seriousness of the offense, what the commission does is we look at what does the offense involve, what harm is part of the offense, what harm is caused by that offense, and what is the sort of typical way that this crime is carried out. So we sort of look at both philosophically, how does this offense tend to work? And then on the ground, what types of offenses do we actually see coming through the door? So we do actual research to get a sense of the kinds of cases that are typically brought under that, heading of whatever the crime is. So we're looking at, as that seriousness is increasing, as the person's record, criminal history, their criminal record is increasing, we want our sentences to actually increase along with that. And so that's why I showed you the sort of three groupings that we had of production, dissemination, and possession, because we really looked at what does it mean to possess pornography? How is that different from dissemination? And then how is that different from production? And we really tried to think through how the harm to the victim changes. And we recognized that there is harm to victims, even with dissemination and possession, because every time that image is seen again and shared, that person is re-victimized. But production is that direct harm to the victim where a child is being asked to engage in a sexual act and it's being recorded. So that is, to us, was the most severe. And when those children are under 13, that's the situation where we thought prison needed to be the recommended sentence in every case.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, can I just butt in here? We're having a really good discussion, but I understand that you are needed in another committee for a bill presentation. So I would suggest moving the gavel to Senator Ingebrigtsen and we can continue this discussion.
Thank you, Senator Limmer. Senator Ingebrigtsen,
I'm here.
Gavel.
Thank you very much. All right.
Thank you.
And I guess I'm looking at the hands up. Was the testifier done testifying yet?
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm not sure what order here, but I see Senator Bingham.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just had a question, and I think it might be my old House days. I have no idea. I mean, the other body days, but I'm getting thrown off by the discussion and not knowing what we're actually going to be doing with the bill. Mr. Chair Limmer, are you intending to lay this over until we get a fiscal note, or are you moving this to the floor?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator Bingham, if passed, this bill would go to the Finance Committee.
Oh, okay.
Follow up?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, I don't break with the Sentencing Guideline Commission often, but I actually have to tend to agree on this one with Senator Limmer and Senator Kiffmeyer. And especially when the testifier said that they would be able to be charged, most of them would be able to be charged in another, anyway, in the other levels. I just don't, I feel like this is an option for prosecutorial discretion. So that is a way, but I do not like, it's this relationship where I know that the Sentencing Guideline Commission is the best situation to make these determinations, but also it's the legislator's right to disagree. And when we do, that's what we're doing right now. But I don't normally do that. So I just wanted Ms. Mitchell to know that. But I do see it in this exception.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Limmer.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to remind us that in 2019, the legislature recommended the very thing that I'm recommending again. Sentencing guidelines said it was not clear. And I'm trying to make that intent clear and to resort back to the direction that we gave them in 2019. I think sometimes in all of the criminal justice reform, we often forget the victim. And in the minority report, there were a few comments that typified the victimhood of young children. Some of their quotes that I have here, this is from the minority report, page 37. Images and videos will continue to be shown on the internet over and over indefinitely, years and years. It's not just a singular action of victimization. Recording, quote unquote, page 36, recording the sexual abuse of a child has a significant lifelong impact on the victim. Nearly 70% of respondents indicated that they worry constantly about being recognized, and 30% report being identified by a person who viewed the imagery of their abuse. And finally, one survivor stated, "If you ask me, a crime that will never end is worse than a crime that is over, no matter how much more serious it may appear." So as we make this decision, Mr. Chair, I'd like us to think about the victims. And I think the 2019 legislature was correct in giving this direction to the sentencing guidelines. Apparently they disagreed, but I'm asking for us to give them a crystal clear intent and direction in this bill. I think I'll hold my other comments, Mr. Chair, but I would like to have, I would like to call for a roll call vote. And I would like the decision recorded, all that roll call vote be recorded in the Senate Journal.
A roll call is requested, so it is granted. Senator Limmer, were those your final comments?
Yes, we will need to have show of three hands for that.
Show of three hands for a recorded vote. I got to follow. Somebody's got to tell me, is there three?
Yep, there is.
All right, there is. Of course there is. Okay, a recorded vote will take place, as well as also be recorded in the, however you said that.
Journal.
Recorded in the Senate Journal.
The Senate Journal. And thank you for those comments. And I'm sorry about being late here. I was at another hearing. But I'm so it's so refreshing to hear lawmakers talk about, especially when you talk about crime, talk about the victims and remembering the victims and what they're going through. And I really appreciate that, Senator Limmer. So with that, Please call the roll.
Mr. Chair, you'll need a motion, and I move that Senate Bill 1457 be recommended to pass and move to the Finance Committee.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, Senator Johnson had to step out for another committee, or I know he wants to be here for this vote.
I
Okay.
believe, Mr. Chair, he's aware of the situation, but he still had duties outside of the committee.
So would you like to proceed then?
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Motion is made.
may-
Senator Latz.
thank you. Just had a question. Could Senator Limmer direct me to the statutory provision that was passed in 2019 that gave different direction to the Guidelines Commission than he suggests they took?
I think I'll ask counsel for that reference, Mr. Backus.
Mr. Chair, members, I'll have to find it. My recollection is that the legislature directed the Guidelines Commission to essentially do a thorough review of child pornography laws in terms of their rankings. I'll try to find that language, though.
Members, we do have a motion.
Wait. So, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to have the answer to my question before we take a vote, if I may.
Very good.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I'll have to rely on Mr. Backus on that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Backus, when you're ready.
How's it going? Hi.
Mr. Chair, members, sorry about the delay. I had to work my way through it. Here it is. I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. The language is the Sentencing Guidelines Commission shall comprehensively review and consider modifying how the sentencing guidelines and the sex offender grid address the crimes described in, and it gives a reference to the 2 child pornography crimes as compared to similar crimes, including other sex offenses and other offenses with similar statutory maximums. So, Mr. Chair, that's the legislative direction.
Senator Latz.
With that, Mr. Chairman, I guess I just want to make that point, which is that the legislature did not direct the Guidelines Commission to increase penalties or to change the formulation of the grid for these particular offenses. They asked the commission to review it, and the commission did review it. So the commission did not contravene or thumb its nose at or reject the supposedly clear legislative intent, because there was no clear legislative intent as to outcome. The direction was to review it and consider it, and that's what they did. So I would like that to be on the record, Mr. Chairman. That's not a logical basis for voting one way or the other on this particular proposal. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
And Mr. Chairman.
Senator Limmer.
And Mr. Chairman, Nevertheless, there was a report by the Sentencing Guidelines Commission. Matter of fact, there were two reports, a majority and a minority. If there was no recommendation, I'm kind of surprised that there'd be a minority difference from the majority report. But nevertheless, this bill represents this direction of the current legislature. And we are in agreement with the minority report.
Okay. Members, any further questions? Seeing none.
Do my motion, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Limmer renews his motion to pass Senate File 1457. And a roll call has been requested. Take the roll.
Senator Limmer?
Aye.
Senator Anderson?
Aye.
Senator Bigham?
Aye.
Senator Ingebrigtsen?
Aye.
Senator Johnson? Senator Johnson?
Aye.
Senator Kiffmeyer?
Aye.
Senator Latz?
No.
Senator Matthews?
Aye.
Senator Pappas?
No.
There being 7 yeses and 2 noes.
The motion with 7 yeses and 2 noes, the motion does prevail. Senate File 1457 will be re-referred to, I'm sorry, somebody help me.
Finance.
Finance. Okay. Thank you, members. Senator Pappas.
I had a question for Senator Limmer, if he's going to take back the chair or whatever. I'm just wondering what your plan is, because normally bills that have a cost to them would be bundled in with a omnibus, a judiciary and public safety bill, which I assume you still need to do in order to fund all the courts and all the agencies. So I'm just curious as to why this isn't becoming part of the omnibus bill.
Senator Limmer, who now is Limmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator Pappas, as you may know, we could move this into an omnibus bill shortly after it gets reviewed in the Finance Committee, which is the direction that I may be going in.
Okay, thank you.
And Mr. Chair, could you pass the gavel back to me?
I did, Mr. Chair.
You did. All right.
Gavel.
Thank you. Senator Pappas, you still have your hand up, as do I. I'm going to take mine down if you do. Thank you. We'll move on to the fourth order of business. Senator Bigham, Bill 1197. Senator Bigham, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity to present Senate File 1197. I would like to thank and recognize my co-authors, Chair Limmer, Vice Chair Johnson, Lead Latz, and Leader Kent. I do that to show the broad bipartisan support of the proposed legislation. Members, this bill would make it a misdemeanor to publish without consent a member of law enforcement's personal information, which in the bill is defined as their address, directions to their home, photographs of their home. If the dissemination poses an imminent and serious threat to the law enforcement official's safety, and the person is also making the information publicly available, would know or reasonably should have known that an imminent and serious threat disseminating such information would occur. I really ask that the committee support this legislation for a few reasons. One, many communities do not have a lot of officers patrolling a community at one time. If you have 75 to 100 people that would show up at an officer's home, there is not sufficient law enforcement available to protect the community property and, most importantly, human lives from potential harm. These events pop up really quickly too, and there's little time for law enforcement to react with what is going on in the community. We need law enforcement, the second one, we need law enforcement to be focused on keeping our streets safe, solving crimes to bring justice for victims.